name is Frank Black. I am 78 years old this month. I was drafted in August of 1945. I thought I would never be sent overseas or anything because the atomic bomb had just been dropped and I assumed that the war would be over soon. But I was wrong. I was shipped to Camp Blanding, which is just a little bit north of Gainesville, near Stark, here in Florida. And I trained there from August until December, just before Christmas. It was not very grueling. I had been used to hard work. I'd been living on a farm. And so when I got to sleep until 6:15, that was sleeping late for me because I had been used to getting up 4:30 or 5. And when we got to stop work or training at 5, that was great too because I didn't have to milk the cows after we finished the other work. But it was like probably a scout camp or something. Now, I learned some interesting things, although I'd been a country boy and had hunted all my life, and they couldn't teach me a whole lot about shooting and marching. The first time we went out for a march, it was supposed to be a 10-mile hike. We'd been walking for almost an hour, and then the lieutenant up in front of the company turned around facing us and held up his baton, the stick, and acted like he was breaking it in half. I didn't know what it meant, but all of the other fellows just stopped and went over and lay down under a tree. That was the first time I'd ever heard of a break. We didn't have breaks on the farm. We worked until the job was done. But it was an interesting experience, and I met some interesting people. The training was not bad. As I say, it was kind of like going to camp. Fortunately, we finished just before Christmas, so I got to go home for 2 weeks during Christmas, and then they shipped me up to New Jersey, and we got on a little Liberty ship. It's the biggest ship I was ever on, but I'd never been out on the ocean before, and it was a little ship for the ocean. But we sailed and landed in Le Havre, France in 12 days. And then from Le Havre, France, we got on the train and rode to a place in Germany called Bamberg. And we spent a few days there. Then from there they sent me to Paris. And I was in Paris for a couple of weeks. It was interesting. All right to visit, but I wouldn't want to live there. And then from Paris, they sent me to a little town in France called Romilly. The reason for my going to Romilly was that there was a school there to teach people to be criminal investigators. I spent a month there training to be a criminal investigator. And then they sent me to Munich in Germany, and I joined the 508 MP battalion as a criminal investigator. Our job was to handle any problem that the regular MPs couldn't handle in one 8-hour shift. So if they ran into a murder that had to be investigated, they turned it over to us. Or one of our big problems was black market. Black market was big then because a pack of cigarettes that the GIs could buy for 70 cents would be worth $10 or more to the German civilians, the ones who had the money. Or rather than getting money, frequently we traded for things, for antiques or jewelry or anything the Germans had that they would be willing to part with for cigarettes or coffee or sugar or chocolates or other things that we could get in the PX. But it was against the law, and if the MPs ran into a problem of this kind, they turned it over to us. We also handled fraternization. Fraternization was association between American GIs and the German women. Some of the most interesting problems I had were with fraternization. Well, I could talk about it. One case I remember, a woman named Mimi Thoma. I didn't know it at the time, but later I found out that she was a famous German movie star. And one of the officers in the company next to us, a constabulary company, which was a kind of police, but a little different from the regular MPs. I think he was a lieutenant colonel, had been accused of fraternizing with Mimi Thoma. And it was interesting to meet a legitimate movie star and see that she was no different from anybody else, from Aunt Gladys or anybody else that I had known.
Does fraternizing mean just going out on a date, or is it having an affair with?
It was having an affair. And it was not uncommon at all. As a matter of fact, even my partner shacked up with one of the German girls. It was, well, there wasn't much of any other way that the girls could get by. They had to have somebody to take care of them, and the GI was about the best choice they could make.
Well, if the bomb was dropped and it's 1945 August, now we're in 1946.
We're now in 1946.
So what are we doing over there anyway?
Well, they're still over there. We were occupying. Like Baghdad. The war in Iraq is over, but we're still there and going to be there for quite a while. When I first got over there, every GI carried his weapon, his .45. You just didn't go out without it. Probably kind of like it is in Iraq now. But by the middle of the year, by the middle of 1946, it became against the law because they were no longer needed. But of course, we had our weapons all the time because we were police.
So what did you do after the stint in the with the MPs? Did you just always, that's what you did?
Yes, I came home when my year or whatever, I don't remember.
Did you stay in that one town the whole time?
Yes, I was in Munich all the time. I did some sightseeing. I went to Garmisch in Berchtesgaden, where Hitler's eagle nest, where his country home was, but I was in Munich for the whole period.
Did you have any contact at all with any concentration camp victims?
Yes. One of the cases I remember was a concentration. The concentration camps were used by the Germans as kind of a refugee camp. And the camps were there, and we needed a place to put the refugees whose homes had been bombed. And Munich, the city, was just a rubble. Downtown had all been bombed, and so a lot of people were homeless. And they were taken out to the concentration camps, and they lived there. We knew there were camps, but we didn't know they were extermination camps. They were supposed to be just, we had concentration camps. We concentrated the Japanese in the camps out west. But they were not just concentration, they were extermination camps. And no, when the ovens were shut down, the camps had buildings, barracks, that were still usable. And the people lived in those barracks. They had kitchens. They used them to prepare food. Now, the camps were much more comfortable than some of the homes that I went into that had been damaged so severely that, well, they were just wrecks, but people still lived in them because they had no place else to go.
So you knew what had happened in the camp. You knew that, all that stuff.
No, not really. We didn't know then anything like as much as we know now. We knew they had been used for concentration camps, but we didn't know the extent to which they had been used as extermination camps.
Even as late as 1946?
No.
Wow, that surprises me.
Well, it shouldn't, because a lot of the information we have, we gained from people who had seen what was happening and who told about it. And they were hesitant to come forward until sometime after the war was over.
Were you surprised when you got back home and when eventually you found out?
Yes, it was shocking, and it still is, that human beings can treat other human beings that way. It's hard for me to believe it, and I can understand some of the people who deny that it happened, but it's just like evolution. We see the evidence, and unless you want to shut your eyes, you have to accept it. Part of the job of an investigator is a stakeout. You've seen on the movies stakeouts, and they actually happen, and they actually happen exactly the way they're shown on the movies. I remember one case where my partner and I were staking out a house waiting for, I think his name was Martin Bormann. He was one of the Nazi leaders who was rumored to be in the neighborhood. And the house we were staking out was down a flight of steps. You have to realize that Munich is in the foothills of the Bavarian Alps. It's mountainous. Where we were, the mountains were not high, but they were rather big hills. So houses were built on these hills, somewhat like the houses in San Francisco. And we were staked out in a house down a long flight of wooden steps. We were sitting there waiting, which was our job, and we heard somebody outside the door. We rushed to the door, and as soon as whoever was there heard us in the house, he turned and started running up the steps. My partner pulled his .45, he got to the door first, and shot. And his shot castrated the man, which was an unusual shot to make. Another time I was on patrol with an MP. I don't remember the reason. It was still the Martin Bormann thing. It was about midnight, and we were driving down, he was driving the Jeep down the street. He had just got there. He was a new recruit, and I was kind of hoping I could train him, but he wasn't very trainable. We were driving down the street about midnight. There was a curfew, and nobody was supposed to be out, but we saw a man walking down the street, and the driver pulled over, got out, and yelled, "Halt!" And the man, for some reason, didn't halt. He kept walking, and the kid pulled out his .45 and shot, killed him dead. Well, the man was just I don't know whether he was deaf or what. He wasn't wanted for anything as far as I know, but the kid was a little bit too eager. He didn't last long. They shipped him out somewhere else. Another time, this was not really part of the job, but another time I was near the railroad, not the railroad, but it's an interurban line. It's like a little railroad that runs around the city. It's sort of like the subway, except it's up on top. And it was the only way that most Germans had to travel. And the subways or these trolleys would just get filled with people, and people would be hanging on the sides of them because there was no room inside. And I was following one time, and for some reason one of the German kids or fellows, he was about 19, who was hanging on the side, fell off, and his legs went under the wheels of the trolley and just chopped him off like you'd chop him off with an axe. It was a pretty bloody, messy situation. But even though the war was essentially over, there still were problems. And one of the MPs in our battalion, his name was, he was a New Yorker named Akongigo, I believe. Strange fellow. Anyway, he and his partner happened to catch Martin Bormann. They didn't know it was Martin Bormann, but we were looking for him. And they stopped the fellow and weren't very careful. And Bormann pulled a gun and shot the kid. Didn't seriously wound him, but they made him corporal because he got shot. But Bormann got away. He was eventually caught, but we didn't catch him. Well, I played that game until January of 1947. And then they sent me back to Le Havre, put me on a ship. First of all, they put me on a General Brooke was the name of it. It was a big ship, much bigger than the little Liberty ship I came over on. I was really happy to steam out on the General Brooke. 3 days out of Le Havre, a boiler blew. They had to turn around and take us back to Le Havre and put us on another a Liberty ship this time. But eventually, in another 12 days, I got home. And I was happy to get home. The experience was interesting to me. I resented being drafted, but I never would have volunteered because it really didn't affect me. But after I was drafted and had gone through it, it was an interesting experience, and it was a very valuable experience too. I traveled to places I never would have seen, met people I never would have met, and had experiences I never would have had. And it was valuable financially too, although when I went into the service, we were paid $30 a month, $1 a day. And at that time, that wasn't a really bad salary. The minimum wage then was 30 cents an hour. So $30 a month with your food, board, clothing, everything wasn't bad. And when I got back, the GI Bill paid for 4 years of college for me. And without the GI Bill, I might not have gone to college. So it wasn't anything that I resent.